HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Pint of Murder by Charlotte Macleod, read by William Dufris.
To my aunt for her 91st birthday. Chapter 1.
Aunt Aggie, are you all right? Damn fool question.
The old woman on the floor retched again. The body jerked in convulsions, then was still. Agatha Treadway died as she'd lived, despising Marian Emery.
She seemed okay at supper time.
Marian wasn't being much help. She sat huddled on one of the dusty green plush chairs in the front hall, shivering in a baby doll nightgown that was ridiculous on her lanky, middle-aged figure, and in any case a bit optimistic, even for July, although summers in eastern Canada are much milder than tourists are apt to expect.
"What did she eat?"
snapped Dr. Druffett. He was feeling, not for the first time, a powerful urge to land his wife's cousin a hefty blow across the starboard mandible.
Just the usual."
"The usual what? For God's sake, Marian, try to make sense for once in your life."
"Hell, Henry, how do I know? Something out of a jar from the cellar. String beans, I guess it was, and bread and butter and tea. Same as always."
"Did you eat the same things?"
"I had a cup of tea and some bread and butter, that's all. I'd grabbed a bite at the Busy Bee when I got off the bus, knowing there'd be no hope of a decent meal from Auntie."
Marian's shrug turned into a shudder.
"Henry, she's not really dead, is she?"
"Here, cover yourself up." The doctor snatched a faded tapestry scarf from the hall table and slung it around the woman's thin shoulders. "Of course she's dead. From the look of that kitchen floor, I'd guess food poisoning. She probably woke up with stomach cramps and came downstairs to mix herself a dose of baking soda, then it really hit her. Any of those string beans left, eh?"
"I don't know."
"Then go find out, can't you?"
"God, Henry, don't make me go back there again."
But Marian Emery was used to doing as she was told at the mansion. She dragged herself off the chair and slumped down the drafty, dark hallway, looking every minute of her 46 years, Dr. Druffett herding her along like a snappish old collie. As they passed through the swinging door into the kitchen, they heard a rapping at the back door.
"Now, who the hell is that?"
Sidling close to the wall in order to avoid what was on the floor, Marian went over and snapped on the outside light.
"Oh, hi, Janet."
She betrayed herself as a foreigner by pronouncing the name to rhyme with Gannet. Janet Wadman herself, like a good New Brunswicker, used the gentler Janet. She looked as gentle as her name, though in fact she could be crisp enough if need arose. Her peach-blossom cheeks were the sort to show dimples if there'd been anything to smile about, and her baby-fine hair had turned to a soft, curly nimbus in the night air, showing bronze-brown glints under the naked overhead bulb. Janet was the younger sister of Bert Wadman, who ran the farm next door, the mansion's only neighbor out here on the hill. She was clutching a challis wrapper around her, a dainty rose-printed thing designed for a pretty woman, which Bert's wife, Annabel, had given her a year and a half ago when Janet had gone away to an office job in St. John. She had loved the robe then. Now its roses were a trifle too exuberant for her pallor, the pattern too sweet to go with the more mature set of her mouth.
"I couldn't sleep."
The purple smudges under Janet's dark gray eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping for some time now.
"And I heard the doctor's car drive in. Is she bad?"
Henry Druffett had a mean streak in him. He stepped away so she could see into the kitchen. "What do you think?"
"Oh, my God! What was it?" "Henry says food poisoning,"
Marian answered for him.
"But that's crazy. I'll get a bucket of sawdust, eh?"
Clenching her teeth, Janet ran for the woodshed. She had to get away from there long enough to pull herself together. When she came back a few minutes later, outwardly a bit more collected and carrying a galvanized pail in her hand, she found the others sniffing at a preserving jar they had taken from the ancient high-domed electric refrigerator.
They smell okay to me,
Marion was saying. You can't go by that, Dr. Druffett replied. This would be botulism. It's far deadlier than ordinary food poisoning. Home-canned string beans are dangerous breeding grounds because of their exceptionally low acid content. Aggie ought to have known better.
But Auntie canned them herself, Marion argued. And you know how fussy she was.
I also know she was 87 years old. At her age, she could slip up for once, couldn't she? Anyway, I'm going to send this jar down for analysis by the morning bus. I ought to take a sample of the stomach contents, too, I suppose. Get me a spatula and an empty container with a lid to it.
Janet had begun scattering sawdust over the mess on the floor, being careful not to get any on the old woman, whom she dearly loved.
Couldn't you hold off till I got a specimen? Snapped the doctor.
No, I couldn't.
It was none of his business why. Janet wasn't going to tell anybody ever about that last time she'd gone out with Roy. She'd been feeling queasy all that week. Then she had developed a stitch in her side. She'd thought she must have picked up a bug of some sort, and that it would go away if she kept working and made believe it wasn't there. But the pain had gotten worse. By Friday, she had felt downright awful, but Roy had been planning a big smash to celebrate his birthday, and she couldn't bear to spoil it. For the past several months, Roy had been giving her every reason to believe his happiness depended on being with her. There had been hints from certain of their co-workers that she wasn't the only girl who'd been led to think so, but naturally she put them down to jealousy. So she'd had a bottle of champagne chilled and waiting when he came to pick her up, and had taken a few sips herself in the hope of quieting her stomach, while he and her roommates drank the rest. Then they'd gone on to the restaurant, and the minute she got inside and smelled the food, she'd had to rush outside again and disgrace herself all over the sidewalk. To make matters worse, a couple of chaps Roy knew had come along just then. She'd been too wretched to hear what they were saying, but she could guess what the laughter was about. And Roy had been furious. He'd shoved her into a cab, given the driver $5 and her address, and stormed off. Whether she had managed to convince the man that she wasn't drunk but sick, she'd never know. In any event, he had dropped her at a hospital emergency ward and driven away without offering to help her inside. She had managed that somehow by herself and gone through the nightmare of getting admitted when she didn't know where she was and could hardly remember her own name for the pain. Roy hadn't even sent a get-well card. It wasn't that he hadn't known about her ruptured appendix. As soon as she was able, Janet had sent word to the office. The boss's secretary had come right over on her lunch hour with a bunch of flowers and been sweet about telephoning Annabelle and Bert. Alice and Moira had dropped by a few times after work, and at last Janet had gotten up courage enough to mention Roy's name. Moira had given Alice a look, and Alice had blushed and said, "Oh, he's fine. I'll tell him you said hello." And that was the end of her great romance. Only Janet wasn't the sort who could turn her feelings on and off like faucets, and that was one of the reasons she couldn't endure the sight of that kitchen floor. She got out the mop and filled her pail with hot soap suds and fished out a tissue to wipe her tear-wet cheeks. "Furthermore," she sniffled angrily, "you can analyze till you're black in the face, but you'll never get me to believe Mrs. Treadway let those beans go bad. Who's the doctor here, you or Henry?" Marion retorted. "If Auntie didn't, then who did? That's one of her jars, isn't it? God knows I've seen enough of them." "Yes, I know. She bought 12 dozen of each size the day she got back from her honeymoon, and never broke one in her life. She was so proud of those jars." Janet brushed away a last tear and went on swishing suds over the kitchen floor. Mrs. Treadway had been proud of her linoleum, too. "Well, Aggie was long past her 70, said Henry Druffett in that fretful voice, which was one of his several unpleasant characteristics. Her faculties weren't what they had been. "She was sharp as a tack, and then some," Janet insisted. "Marion can tell you that." Certainly the niece had been here enough times to judge, though the aunt had done all she could to discourage Marion from inviting herself. "Sucking around after money," had been Mrs. Treadway's acid and wholly accurate estimate of this familial devotion, both in and out of Marian's hearing.
"Besides,"
Janet went on,
"she knew perfectly well how careful you have to be about canning snap beans. Rank poison if you let the air get at 'em, she'd say. You've heard her, Marian."
Dr. Druffett wasn't paying any attention. He wrapped his specimens in a clean cup towel and stuffed them into his black leather satchel. "Marian, I suppose you'll want to come back with me. Get your clothes on while I phone down to see if Elizabeth has the spare room ready, eh?"
"But you're not going off and leave Mrs. Treadway here on the floor," cried Janet. "It's not decent."
"Can't see where it's going to make any difference to her now," the doctor grumbled. "All right, then. One of you help me carry her in on the dining-room table. I'll send Ben Potts up first thing in the morning. No sense dragging both of us out of a night's sleep." He slid his hands under Mrs. Treadway's armpits and turned her on her back, letting the arms flap loose. Marian cowered away, but Janet bent and took the thin legs. This couldn't be doing her incision much good, but it was the last service she could perform for her old friend, and that was what mattered. Marian did summon up enough enterprise to go ahead and switch on the light over the dining-room table. As it shone down on the doctor's head, Janet couldn't help noticing how bald he'd gotten since she saw him last. Henry Druffett was getting on in years. His wife must be middle-aged, too. It was hard for Janet to think of Mrs. Druffett as being any age at all. She'd had the doctor's wife for a Sunday school teacher and always pictured her like the church steeple, rigidly upright and pointed in the proper direction. Infallibility wasn't the husband's long suit, though. Henry had stepped into his father's practice after barely scraping through medical school and hung on to it mainly because he'd had no competition until the new highway put the county hospital within practical driving distance. Now his patients preferred to take their more serious ailments to a place where diagnosis was more reliable and prognosis less dependent on a sound constitution and a hopeful disposition. Annabel Wadman was down at the hospital now, having surgery for what the older ladies of Pitcherville still referred to as female complaints. She'd known for some time it would have to be done and had timed the operation for the summer holidays, when her children could stay with their grandparents not far from the hospital and be spoiled rotten. Annabel would be going to her folks, too, to recuperate and be close to her specialist for post-operative checkups. Originally, they hadn't planned for Janet to come home and keep house for her brother. Molly Olson and some other neighbors from the village had promised to come up and lend a hand, and anyway, Bert took off to be with his wife and the boys every chance he got. After her own illness, however, Janet had welcomed any excuse to get away from St. John and Roy. According to Annabel, it was Dr. Druffett's fault she needed the operation. He had delivered her first baby, and she'd never been quite right since. The doctor claimed it had simply been a difficult birth, and nobody could have managed better. Janet, knowing her sister-in-law, was inclined to side with the doctor on that one, though of course she'd never dare say so, because she loved Annabel in spite of everything. But she knew for a positive fact that Dr. Druffett had to be wrong about Agatha Treadway's having killed herself with her own cooking. The old woman's persnickety ways had been a family joke ever since Janet could remember, and long before. Those jars could no doubt be sold as antiques these days, but there wasn't a chip or a crack in any one of them. Mrs. Treadway had never used a sealer ring more than once, and she'd no more have fooled around with halfway methods than she'd have danced the black bottom on Sunday. She even used to boil the tongs employed to lift the scalded jars out of the preserving kettle. If those string beans had gone bad in the jar, then it wasn't Agatha Treadway who'd put them up, and that was that. But if she hadn't canned them herself, then she'd never have eaten them. 40-odd years ago, Mrs. Treadway's husband had opened a commercially processed tin of tomatoes with a patent can opener of his own invention, eaten its contents, and died. From that day on, the widow had bought nothing from any grocer except flour, sugar, salt, and tea. She'd gotten milk and eggs from the Wadman farm, churned her own butter, and made her own sourdough bread. She caught fish in the pond now and then, or ate home-cured bacon the Wadmans gave her, but mostly she lived on what she grew in her own garden. When she got too old to tend her own plot, she'd been glad enough to accept fresh fruits and vegetables for canning from any neighbor who chose to share them with her, but nobody, not even Janet's late mother, had ever got her to taste a bite of cooked food after Charles Treadway died. Yet Agatha Treadway had been fond of the Wadmans, fonder than she'd ever been of her own kin. She'd outlived both her brothers. For blood relatives, she had only the two nieces, Marian and Elizabeth, plus Elizabeth's daughter Gillian and grandson Bobby. Marian she'd openly scorned. Elizabeth Druffett hadn't set foot inside the Victorian ark Pitcherville called the Mansion for 15 years and more. At least Marian's faithful treks up from Boston had kept her in the will. "She'll get her fair share," old Aggie had scoffed. "God knows she's worked hard enough for it." The half that was to have been Elizabeth's before the big fight would go to Jilly Bascom, the Druffetts' only offspring. Not that there could be much left for anybody by now. Charles Treadway had run through most of a sizable lumber fortune financing his crazy inventions. The widow had been dipping at the capital for years to keep the mansion from tumbling around her ears. Whatever she'd had, though, would stay in the family because Agatha had always believed in sticking by your own, whether you could stand them or not. It was going to be a lonesome old summer out here on the hill with Mrs. Treadway gone and Bert away so much, and only Julius the cat for company. Janet gave the wet mop a final rinse and hung it back in the cellarway. She got a clean hand towel out of the drawer by the kitchen sink, wet and soaped one end of it, then went to the dining room and gently sponged the face and hands that were already like waxworks. She went upstairs for a clean sheet, a nice one with a crocheted edge, brought it back down and spread it over the tall, still form on the dining room table. There was nobody here to help her. Marian had gone off in the doctor's car without a backward look, much less a tear for dear old Auntie. That didn't matter. Janet was crying enough for both of them. Her brother Bert would feel awful, too, when he found out. No sense in waking him tonight. One thing about bad news, as their own dead mother used to say, it could always wait till morning. Chapter 2.
"Janet, could you spare me a slice of bread?" "Come on in, Marian," sighed Janet. "I'll warm up the teapot." This was 10 days after Agatha Treadway had been laid to rest, and Janet was beginning to wish she had stayed in St. John to nurse her sore belly and her broken heart. Watching Roy parade his new love couldn't be any more irksome than fetching and carrying for Marian Emery. Bert, who didn't find neighborly hospitality onerous, since he wasn't the one who had to cope with their new star boarder, was getting a good deal of amusement from Marian's staying on at the mansion. "Aye, how's the heiress this morning? Found the hidden millions, eh?" "Nope," mumbled their self-invited guest through a mouthful of Janet's homemade doughnut. "Still looking."
"Keep it up. It's good healthy exercise. Don't know as it's good for much else." Bert went out to start the tractor, and she glowered after him.
"Great little kidder, isn't he? When I think of all the nights I've sat freezing to death on that lousy Boston bus, and for what? $5,000 in Canadian money and a half share in a white elephant. I know damn well Auntie had a boodle stashed away someplace, and I'll find it if I have to take that moldy dump apart board by board. Marian, I've told you over and over you're wasting your time," said Janet. Not that it would do any good. "You know better than I do how your Uncle Charles managed to get rid of what his father left him. Your aunt had her old-age pension and that little bit left in the bank, and everybody around here was surprised she had that much. Jilly wasn't expecting any great windfall, was she? How do I know what she expects? All she's doing is sitting down there on her backside expecting me to do the work for her. Boy, I wouldn't have wished a kid like her even on my cousin Elizabeth, running off with that Bascom creep before she even got through high school, and then crawling back with a brat on her hands after he ditched her. and holing up in that shack beside the diner instead of going home to that nice big house when Elizabeth practically begged her on bended knee. But no, Jilly had to be independent. Marian bit savagely into another donut. She's not going to let Elizabeth run her life, she says, but she sure doesn't mind letting old Mom foot the bills for the groceries. If it hadn't been for her folks, she and that kid of hers would have starved to death long ago. Though she'd never been any great chum of Jilly Druffett, Janet didn't like hearing Marian run the woman down like this. Now, Marian, you can't say Jilly doesn't try. She works whenever she gets a chance. At what? Waitressing part-time at the Busy Bee when Ella's off on a drunk, taking a course in poodle clipping when there isn't a poodle within 50 miles of this jerkhole. Now she's breeding dachshunds, for God's sake. Last year she was going to make $1 million a week selling eggs. Then one of her hens got out of the pen and some kid ran over it in his jalopy and she bawled for a week and had to get rid of the rest because they weren't safe down there. I know. She brought them to us. Janet didn't add that she and her sister-in-law had had a quiet sniffle together over the tragic look on Jilly's thin little face as she dragged the makeshift crate of squawking poultry from her old Ford. The hens had proved to be incredibly poor layers, but Janet saw Annabel was still protecting them from the stew pot. Having drained the last dreg of tea and realizing that Janet had no intention of brewing any more, Marian set down her empty cup. Well, I'd better get back to the mausoleum. Dot Feuder's coming up this morning, though why I asked her, I don't know. Dot supposedly cleaned for Aunt Aggie every week, but I can't see any sign that she ever did anything. I'll probably get lung cancer from inhaling so much dust. Hold your nose, Janet suggested. Dot's not too bad, so long as you stand over her with a shotgun. Annabel tried her for a while back in the winter, though she did say she'd have fared about as well tying a duster to the cat and chasing him through the house. Is that Sam Neddick bringing Dot now? His car just turned into your driveway. Yeah, I suppose so. Sam's supposed to fix a few leaks and cut the grass, but no doubt he'll be gone again before I can grab him. Janet, I don't know what I'm going to do over there. There's work that's absolutely got to be done, and the lawyers won't let go of a cent till we file a complete inventory. Elizabeth keeps yelling at me to get it finished, but she won't raise a hand herself. She's so damn proud of that grudge she's been holding for 15 years that she still won't stick her nose inside the door of the mansion. I was surprised she even showed up at the funeral, but I guess she wanted to make sure Aunt Aggie was safely planted so that her darling daughter could get her little hooks into her half of the Treadway millions. What a howl. Won't Jilly come up and help you, eh? She said she would, but then one of her dogs came down with a mumps or something, so she has to sit and hold its crummy paw. I don't suppose you'd care to run over for an hour or so? Marian interjected slyly. Janet's first impulse was to snap the woman's head off. Then she reflected that it was a long way to dinner time, that the house was clean and the washing done, that she hadn't an earthly thing to do here but sit and brood about Roy. She might as well go. All right. I'm not going to clean for you, but I'll help with the inventory. Should I bring a notebook and pencil, eh? God, no. Uncle Charles left enough of his letterheads to sink a battleship. Would you believe Treadway Enterprises Limited? What a fruitcake. Okay, let's go before Dot falls asleep. Janet followed Marian over to the mansion, wishing it were Jilly instead of this endless complainer and all-around leech who'd moved up to the hill with her skinny little boy and her fat little dogs. At least they now had things in common. The 6 years difference in age that seemed so wide a barrier in school wouldn't matter now that they were both grown women who'd been ditched. Now, who the hell is that? Marian broke in on Janet's bitter reverie, pointing to a rusty truck that had just pulled in behind Sam Neddick's rattletrap. A bizarrely attenuated and elongated man was climbing out, craning his neck to look up at the peeling gray paint on the house Pitcherville had once considered the acme of elegance. Maybe this trip was going to be worthwhile after all. Oh, haven't you ever met him? Said Janet with malicious glee. That's Jason Bain. Bain? Isn't he the one Auntie was always talking about, who sues somebody for something about once a week? What's he want from me? Anything he can get, most likely. He's not particular, long as it's free. Come on, let's find out.
They walked around to confront the man who was now at the front door. Bain took his finger off the bell-push and raised his noisome felt hat an inch or two. "Miss Emery, I presume? Bain's my name. I don't believe we've had the pleasure."
The pleasure's all yours, mister," said Marion sourly. "What do you want?"
"I just stopped by to collect some property of mine."
"Like what?"
"I'm looking for a patent right that was held jointly by me and Charles Treadway. According to the terms of our agreement, it reverts to me on the widow's death."
Marion set her jaw. "Is that so? For your information, Mr. Bain, nothing's going to leave this house till the inventory's been filed and we know exactly where we stand."
Bain shrugged.
"I didn't come here looking to stir up trouble, but if I have to take legal action to protect my interests, I will. Might be kind of expensive for you to fight me and lose, but that's your lookout, not mine."
Marion's hair had once been raven, and she'd made the mistake of trying to keep it that way. Against the dead black mass, her face showed white as a plaster cast.
"I don't know what you're talking about. What's it for, anyway? I've never seen any patent. I wouldn't even know what one looked like." "You'll know this one, 'cause my name's on it." "Oh, yeah? And what's that supposed to prove? You got anything to show you're entitled to the claim?" "You bet your bottom dollar I have." "Then fork it over." "That ain't how I do business. You show me the patent, and I'll show you the proof." "Well, I haven't got it, and I don't know where it is,"
Marion told him sulkily.
"That don't surprise me none. Stands to reason Miss Treadway wouldn't leave a valuable document laying around loose. She had it hid away somewheres, and if I was you, I'd start right this minute and ransack this house from stem to stern. If that patent ain't in my hands by Thursday morning, I'll be talking to my lawyer Thursday afternoon."
Bain didn't bother to tip his hat again. He swiveled his enormous length around, thumped down the worn wooden steps, folded himself inside his shabby pickup, and drove off. Marion stared after the smoke-belching truck.
"Can you beat that? If that old buzzard thinks he can scare me—"
Clearly he could, and had.
"Janet, what am I going to do?" "Find that patent, I suppose." "Then what? If he thinks I'm just going to hand it over to him like a dummy, he's got rocks in his head. How do I know he's entitled to any patent? The thing must be worth a bundle, or he wouldn't be putting up such a squawk."
Janet shook her head.
"You don't know old Jace. He's perfectly capable of starting a lawsuit just for the fun of it. Anyway, you'd better find the thing. Where do you suppose it could be?" "God knows. I've been through Uncle Charles's desk and every other place I can think of already. I don't remember noticing any patents, but maybe I skipped over them thinking they didn't count for anything. Oh, looks as if I'll have to start all over again." "But what about the inventory? Wouldn't the patent have to be shown to the lawyer along with everything else?"
Marion slumped into a chair.
"Oh, I wish I'd never left Boston."
That went for both of them.
"Come on, Marion," snapped Janet. "Sitting there feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to get the job done. Take a paper and pencil and start up attic. Look everything over and list as you go." "It'll take forever." "It sure will if you don't get cracking. I'll begin down cellar. Where did your uncle keep all that stationery of his?"
Janet had made up her mind that Marion Emery was just about the most useless creature who ever encumbered the earth. Then she went through the kitchen and caught Dot Feuder, taking advantage of the diversion caused by Bain's visit, to get herself nicely settled with a box of store cookies and a mug of oversweetened tea.
"Come on, Dot. You're not getting paid to sit around stuffing your face. Help me take inventory." "Huh?" "We're going down cellar and list whatever we find there." "I wouldn't know where to start." "You don't have to know. I'll call things off and you write them down." "You can do that much, can't you?" I guess so."
At least Dot was good-natured. She grinned as she lumbered to her feet.
"I'd just as soon go down cellar anyway. It's nice and cool there." "I know."
That was why Janet had elected to start at the bottom and let Marion stew in the stuffy, dusty attic. Besides, She'd always liked Mrs. Treadway's cellar, except for its peculiarly sticky floor.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?